Hong Kong has long been Asia's financial hub, but that reputation has been shaken as the city has also become the center of Asian unrest. Protests in the former British colony are starting to bite into Hong Kong's economy. The number of tour groups coming from mainland China has dropped from an average of 7,800 per month to 5,641 in June of 2019, right as the protests approached their peak. Also in June, occupancy rates of the city's hotels were down 20% from last year. They're expected to be down 40% in July. But that's not all that's weighing on Hong Kong's economy. The trade tensions between the US and China have slowed economic growth, according to the city's financial secretary. Scenes like this play out in Hong Kong almost every weekend now. It's been this way since June 2019. Now, the unrest is getting more and more violent. So, what's going on in Hong Kong? In April of 2019, Hong Kong's government attempted to amend its extradition laws. The proposed changes would allow criminal suspects from the city to be tried in mainland China. Critics said the bill would curtail the city's independence, as well as free speech. The extradition measure was seen as a pro-Beijing policy and indicative of the growing influence of mainland China over the city. In May 2019, the US weighed in, as a congressional commission warned that the bill could pose risks for national security and economic interests. Hong Kong's chief executive, Carrie Lam, who's kind of like a mayor and governor rolled into one, pushed the bill forward anyway. So in early June of 2019, hundreds of thousands of protesters marched in downtown Hong Kong. A few weeks later, protesters demonstrated near the city's government offices. The demonstrations eventually grew violent when protesters began throwing bricks and metal poles at police. The police responded with batons, 150 rounds of tear gas, and rubber bullets. And the government classified the event as a riot, which meant anyone arrested there could spend up to 10 years in prison. 4 days later, nearly 2 million people took to the streets, according to organizers. Police, though, said that the number was closer to 338,000.
Hong Kong's government is attempting to pass a law that would for the first time allow extraditions to mainland China. The proposal has caused massive opposition and a series of protests. Riot police have used tear gas and rubber bullets on the demonstrators. Still, the administration is pressing ahead. The bill was proposed by the government in February. It covers mainland China and other jurisdictions that could include Taiwan. It was sparked by the case of a Hong Kong man accused of murdering his girlfriend in Taiwan. He was arrested in Hong Kong and convicted of money laundering, but couldn't be sent back to Taiwan for trial because there's no legal framework to do so.
Following the gruesome murder of a pregnant girl by her boyfriend during a trip in Taiwan last year. The suspect, a Hong Kong resident, admitted to the crime after returning home. He, however, could not be extradited to the island to face trial because of the absence of a formal extradition agreement between Hong Kong and Taiwan.
The government said the new law will make sure Hong Kong doesn't become a haven for fugitives. But opponents are concerned that it could open the door for anyone, including political dissidents or civil rights activists, who might risk being arrested on fabricated charges in Hong Kong and sent to the mainland to face unfair trials. Apart from Hong Kong citizens, the law would also apply to foreign residents and even people passing through on business or as tourists. It's one of the latest moves under Chinese President Xi Jinping that is viewed as chipping away at Hong Kong's autonomy, which guarantees free speech and capitalist markets.
Those protesters gave the government 5 demands. The first was a total withdrawal of the extradition legislation and a resignation from Carrie Lam. They also wanted a retraction, so the protest would not be classified as a riot, and they wanted an investigation into the actions of the police during those violent protests. Finally, they wanted a release of anyone who had been arrested in connection with the protests. Not long after, Lam said the bill was dead and apologized for how she handled the situation.
And I have furthermore undertaken that because this bill over the last few months has caused so much anxiety and worries and differences in opinion, I will not, this is an undertaking, I will not proceed again with this legislative exercise.
But the chief executive fell short of meeting protesters' demands to withdraw the bill completely. So, on July 1st of 2019, on the 22nd anniversary of the handover of Hong Kong from British to Chinese rule, more protests broke out. And those demonstrations continued throughout the month.
China has warned it might be losing patience with what it calls a color revolution in Hong Kong. It said those who play with fire must not mistake Beijing's restraint for weakness. They will eventually be punished. A few days after that warning, protesters were back on the streets for the 10th straight weekend. They've defied a police ban on some of the marches and again faced tear gas. Activists have also staged a protest at the international airport to make arriving tourists aware of their campaign.
In air thick with tear gas, inside an underground station, Hong Kong police last night resorting to ever harsher tactics. With the full authority of their masters in Beijing, this, the sharp end of an intensifying crackdown against what is now a fully fledged popular revolt against Chinese rule. These protesters had been attempting to flee. Across the harbour outside a Kowloon police station, a protester was shot in the eye with a baton round from a police shotgun. Despite wearing protective goggles, her eyeball was ruptured, and there are fears she could lose her eye. Earlier, in the same location, police fired tear gas from inside the station. A pitched battle ensued as protesters laid siege. Then this. Policeman inside suffered burns to his legs. Today, an infuriated Beijing lashed out, branding this terrorism. The State Council, China's cabinet, ratcheting up the ruthlessness of the rhetoric, leaving no room now to back down. These were sinister and serious crimes, it said, protesters reckless. Things had reached what the spokesman called a critical juncture. Hong Kong police special forces, undercover operators dubbed the Flying Tigers, were out in force last night and caught on camera posing as black shirt protesters, complete with yellow hard hats. This arrest of a genuine protester, shared widely on social media, triggered fury. Growing outrage over police brutality led to thousands of demonstrators converging today on Hong Kong International Airport, one of the busiest in the world, forcing the total cancellation of all flights in and out. It's the protesters who are brutal, the police said today, exhibiting weapons they said were confiscated.
Our operation basically is targeting and violent rioter, causing deadly effects to our officers or...
A journalist interrupts, asking how he can convince the public the violent rioters aren't actually cops undercover.
Actually, I can confirm here, all our decoy operatives being deployed, they will not, first of all, initiate any disturbance. They will not do any illegal act.
Most Hong Kongers won't buy that now. The trust is broken. There are 28 years still to go before China can take full control of Hong Kong, but Beijing looks impatient to bring the territory under its authoritarian aegis. Among Hong Kongers, banks and businesses, a quiet but rising panic. But would China really come in guns blazing? It would be shooting itself in the foot.
Hong Kong International Airport has cancelled all remaining flights for a second day in a row after anti-government protesters converged on terminals, with some deliberately blocking access to the departure gates.
The airport is again full of protesters, thousands of them. They have now blocked the exits for people who are trying to pass through customs. Check-in is shut down again. This affects both Terminal 1 and Terminal 2. I think it can't be long until the riot police turn up there tonight. I cannot imagine the police putting up with a second night in a row of all outbound flights being cancelled in Hong Kong without intervention.
Midnight Hong Kong time, and the protesters who'd forced the cancellation of all outbound flights for the second day running, fortifying their positions with baggage trolleys, became suddenly agitated as a thin blue line tentatively entered the arrivals hall Terminal 1. Laser pens blinded the officers, who were immediately forced to retreat. The Hong Kong police had said they'd been considering the use of force. Continued disruption on this scale in an airport which handled 75 million passengers last year would prove just too costly. The initial police posse withdrew. Apparently they'd been trying to extract a man who the police claim is a tourist, but the protesters suspect is a plant, possibly a cop undercover. The black shirts thought for a moment they'd seen the police off. Then the riot police arrived. Initially they picked off individuals. Some were beaten, then cuffed, marched off. One riot policeman became immediately trapped inside the doors to the terminal. You see him attempting an arrest, then he's set upon. He loses, then is beaten with his own baton. The intensity of the mistrust and hatred that is built up, exploding. The cop pulls a handgun, but shows restraint. He does not fire. He's finally rescued. There's a standoff at the doors to the terminal, a baggage cart blockade, and a manager in a suit seemingly trying to keep the peace. Beijing's shrill rhetoric of no leniency, no mercy, still reverberating around Hong Kong, a city in the throes of chaos and escalating violence, and now gripped by fear of what China might do. At 20 to 1 in the morning, the protesters surround another suspected police spy and cuff him with plastic cable ties. A few minutes later, in front of the cameras of scores of journalists, they immobilized him, strapping him to a baggage trolley, before somehow he ended up on the floor, where he was brutally kicked and beaten. The editor of a Chinese Communist Party paper, the English-language Global Times, tweeted just over an hour ago that Fu Guohao is one of his Hong Kong-based reporters. The sudden spike of violence had brought the staff at 13 Hong Kong hospitals out in protest today. The image of the young woman with her bloodied eye, now a symbol of what demonstrators brand police brutality. This A&E staffer said only Carrie Lam can end the violence.
Protesters want Chief Executive Leader Carrie Lam to resign, greater democratic reform, and an inquiry into alleged police violence. But Lam says her priority is to stop the unrest that she says has hurt the city's economy.
And Carrie Lam, the pro-Beijing political leader of the semi-autonomous territory, held a news conference this morning. Her legitimacy questioned, her authority diminished. She was grilled by reporters and accused of dodging their questions.
The police have had a very difficult time in the last 2 months to enforce the law and to ensure law and order in Hong Kong. Hong
Kong has become unsafe and unstable, she continued in Cantonese. Violence, no matter who commits it, is pushing Hong Kong onto a road of no return.
So here I ask everybody again to put aside our differences and calm down. Take a minute to look at our city, our home. Can we bear to push it into the abyss and see it smashed to pieces?
As we know from remarks that the Chinese central government has made, Hong Kong very quickly is almost reaching a point of no return, is almost on a knife edge, as people here have said, that this whole system of one country, two systems is possibly in danger of collapse, which could, of course, mean eventually having to declare a state of emergency and sending in the People's Liberation Army. We are nowhere near that at this stage, but China is watching very carefully.
Such violent crimes must be resolutely cracked down on in accordance with the law. No leniency, no mercy. We strongly support the Hong Kong police as they enforce the law strictly to bring the criminals to justice as soon as possible.
This is what the director of the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office, Zhang Xiaoming, who is a top Chinese official, had to say on Wednesday. The violence is getting more and more intense, impacting an increasingly wide part of the society. It can be said that Hong Kong is facing the most serious situation since its return to China. The movement about the extradition bill has gone bad, and it has the clear characteristics of a color revolution. If the situation in Hong Kong continues to worsen into unrest that the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region government cannot control, the central government will not sit back and do nothing.
There's been mounting alarm in Hong Kong over whether China might order the military onto the streets. But today, Communist Party papers released footage, complete with sinister soundtrack, showing convoys of People's Armed Police heading to Shenzhen, on Hong Kong's northern border. These paramilitaries, under the command of the Central Military Council, headed by President Xi Jinping himself, have been used to put down protest, often brutally, in other restive regions, including Xinjiang and Tibet. The PAP boasts artillery and helicopter units, and its own special forces.
This is the 10th straight week of demonstrations in Hong Kong. Protesters have said they won't stop unless the government addresses their demands. But as the protests have dragged on, so have the cost of coming out to the streets every week.
2 weeks ago, I didn't have any gears, but I want to be there and come back against the police, so I got one from my friends. Some people really for the especially the youngsters, they are not rich enough. They do not have enough money to buy materials.
Food, travel, equipment, it all starts to add up. And as the protest got more confrontational, the gear required gets more expensive. A full-face respirator like this costs over $100, and that doesn't include the filters. And self-organized donation systems have sprung up in protest, offering masks, gloves, and other supplies.
我哋幫手咧就分緊物資嘅，咁樣就我哋本身嚟呢度就唔係一嚟就派物資嘅，但係咧就有啲即係可能有啲自發嘅市民就佢哋即係自己買咗啲物資，整合咗啲物資，咁自發做物資站啦。
可以講下係啲物資係即係市民係佢哋點樣知道邊度擺得啲物資捐俾你哋啊？
基本上每次其實有人 set 咗個站咧，其實都擺得物資㗎啦。啲可能係即係比較上年紀嘅人，咁佢哋又自己買啲物資，咁俾我哋，咁我哋啲即係比較後生嘅，咁身體力行組織物資站咁樣嘅啫。
啲中國官員佢哋話呢個組織背後面有外國嘅支持同埋你又點睇咧？
咁我其實即係都出咗嚟即係咁多次，我哋都唔係好見話有咩外國勢力嘅。咁我覺得有啲嗰啲官員係，我諗佢哋即係表現嗰個説法話，即係有外國勢力就其實佢哋低估咗民眾嗰個即係智慧咯。加油，學生！加油，香港人！加油！話俾林鄭月娥知係咪？
Because teacher is also citizen. They are very concerned about the development of the whole world campaign. And we have another role. We want to protect our students, our youngsters. So teachers are willing to come out and speak for the youngsters and also stand by them so that they are not alone.
I think before accusing protesters for anything, try to look at the real problem and how the government how they turn a blind eye to us and to our demands. This is the real problem, the source of the problem. We are trying to solve the problem, but they are trying to attack us or trying to just turn a blind eye to us. And it doesn't help. We are just trying to fight for what we already have, what Hong Kong is. We just want Hong Kong to stay Hong Kong. We are not demanding for something else or something extra. Yeah, that's it.
If all the ways or peaceful way is not answered by the government, I think that most of our protesters may go more violent ways of violence to force the government to answer our request.
Christian and other religious groups have played an important role in the ongoing protests. For them, maintaining Hong Kong's autonomy is especially important because of the lack of religious freedom across the border in mainland China. I'm near the end point of today's protest, and behind me is a major Christian church in Hong Kong, which is also one of the care centers for protesters. During weeks of protests, Christians around Hong Kong have been participating in different ways, holding public services, mediating, singing hymns, and offering supplies.
喺唔同嘅崗位啦，係需要去物資嘅提供去幫助嘅。咁其實就無論水啊，一啲能量上嘅提供啊，或者係需要迫切性嘅地方去提供一個最快嘅支援啦。
The Christian hymn, Sing Hallelujah to the Lord, has become the unofficial protest anthem for both believers and non-believers. They often sing the song when they are facing off against police, who have been accused by some of using excessive force.
喺網上見到有班嘅基督徒都一齊出嚟，希望可以透過詩歌啦，去使到場面能夠可以和平啲啦。
你哋點解揀咗警察總部呢個地方？
透過唱詩歌，能夠去讓到上主臨在喺呢個地方啦，係希望除咗與我哋同在，都與警察同在。阿 Sir 聽唔聽到啊？耶穌愛你啊 Sir！咁當然啦，身為基督徒，我哋都十分關注宗教嘅自由啦。國內嘅打壓宗教嘅情況亦都好嚴重啦。無論係我哋基督徒、基督教啦，抑或係伊斯蘭教，其實個打壓都好嚴重嘅。我哋希望我哋香港可以仍然嘅保持住呢一種嘅宗教自由。
The Chinese government says people can practice religion freely in the country, but that only state-sanctioned religious groups are allowed. Hundreds of thousands of Muslims are held in what are officially called training centers in the far western region of Xinjiang. In Hong Kong, religious groups can practice openly and run hospitals, schools, and charities. More than 1 in 10 Hong Kongers are Christian, including its leader, Carrie Lam. Some Christian leaders have come out strongly against Lam, demanding an official withdrawal of the extradition bill. Hong Kong's chief executive, Carrie Lam, she's also a Christian, a Catholic. What's your message to her?
My dear friend, you must repent. We're doing this protest as citizens of Hong Kong, as people who believe that Hong Kong is far better off without the revision of the extradition bill.